A horrifying viral video shows cars pulling up full of pro-Palestinian individuals. Apparently, according to someone in the video, they ask who the Jews are. And when some people say they're Jewish, the pro-Palestinian individuals just start beating them. I don't know the full story. We just have this video of the fight breaking out. CBS says police investigate possible Jewish hate crime attack at Beverly Grove restaurant. But apparently this is happening a lot. Now, there were clashes in the past couple of weeks between pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel groups in New York and other places. But there have been a lot of reports that Jewish people have just been attacked and they've been beaten simply because they're Jewish, having nothing to do with Israel. I saw a tweet from Ben Shapiro. He was quoting Sarah Silverman. Sarah Silverman said, we have to have a bunch of support for the Jewish diaspora because they are not Israel. And Ben said, keep telling these people that, you're not Israel and see if that does anything about their anti-Semitism. And Ben is correct. These people don't view, they're not looking at a regular Jewish person in America and differentiating between that and Israel. They just don't like Jewish people. So we're going to be waiting, obviously, into the Israel-Palestine stuff. And I'm just going to start off the bat. I want to read this story because look, it's crossing over into an area in which I do cover, like street violence, political clashes. But the Palestine-Israel thing is it's extremely frustrating to talk about and cover because you've got reports from mainstream organizations just absolutely contradicting other mainstream reports. It is the conflict of conflicts. But I will say outright, I am sick and tired of reading lies from the pro-Palestine side. Clearly, there are individuals like Michael Tracy and Glenn Greenwald that I respect. I am not absolutely saying Israel is always right or telling the truth. I just read the news and I keep seeing lies from these leftist activists, and I'm sick of it. Look at this. People getting attacked. We also have this story out of Germany. Germany vows zero tolerance for attacks on synagogues. Authorities have warned of further anti-Semitic incidents after another day of demonstrations in major German cities. Synagogues have been attacked in reaction to escalating in violence in Israel. So again, Ben Shapiro is correct. You go ahead and tell people that you don't agree with Israel or whatever. They will attack you anyway. It needs to stop. This is gross stuff. CBS says authorities are investigating whether an attack on diners that occurred outside a Beverly Grove restaurant late Tuesday night was a Jewish hate crime. You mean anti-Jewish hate crime? The brawl occurred a little before 10 p.m. outside Sushi Fumi in the 300 block of North La Cienega Boulevard. Witnesses said a mob of pro-Palestinians attacked a group of Jewish men who were dining at the restaurant. Cell phone video showed a group of men get out of their car and start to attack them while yelling racial slurs. One of the diners, who was not Jewish, told CBS LA a caravan waving pro-Palestinian flags approached and then began throwing bottles at him and the group he was dining with. The man said he is a photographer and the group was meeting at the restaurant to plan a wedding. The man said he was physically attacked when he tried to defend the group. He said the men used anti-Jewish profanity. He said that he was pepper sprayed during the attack and had to go to the hospital. Los Angeles police told CBS LA that there were no major injuries reported and there were no immediate arrests. The suspects were only described as white men wearing all black, as was seen in the video. They fled south on La Cienega Boulevard in a vehicle described as possibly a black Jeep, police said. The restaurant did not sustain any damage. Officers responded and took a report. Meanwhile, police are also investigating a security video recorded Monday night, which appears to show an Orthodox Jewish man being chased by a caravan of people waving Palestinian flags near Rosewood and La Brea Avenues. The man escaped and was not hurt. I am sick of reading about these people. The left comes and they claim they care. No, they don't. You look at what happened in New York. First and foremost, the NYPD was targeting Jewish schools and playgrounds. There was one sickening viral video where a Jewish man had a restaurant which was closed. And he opened the door to get some fresh air and the police come in and harass them. I think it's funny that you have the identitarian left and the fringe, anti-Semitic right, white supremacist, whatever that faction is. And they all make the same stupid claims about Jewish people. And I'm like watching a dude and he's being harassed by the police for getting fresh air. And they want to claim some conspiracy about Jewish people controlling anything. Yes, there are a lot of wealthy people who happen to be Jewish, but spare me your complete BS. I was talking to a friend of mine who was Jewish, who was woke, and talking about, the plight of the poor Muslims. And I said, do you know how many Christians there are on the planet? I don't know the exact numbers, but I think it's like close to 2 billion. Do you know how many Muslims there are on the planet? Again, it's like, what is it, like 1.4 billion or some huge number? Do you know how many Jewish people are on this planet, including Jewish diaspora? What is the number? Like 7 million, 10 million? Million. It is dramatically smaller. So I hear these fringe conspiracy theories, which are some of the stupidest things I ever heard. There's that one quote. I love it. It's the dumbest thing ever. People often, they think it's Voltaire, but it's not. It's some fringe right, far right guy or whatever you want to call it. That if you want to learn who has control over you, just look to who you can't criticize. And I'm like, shut up, dude. You have mainstream politicians insulting Israel and saying anti-Semitic things all the time, and nothing happens to them. So maybe that quote has some merit in the sense that it certainly isn't Jewish people who are a guy being chased down the street. How many videos did we have to watch of Orthodox Jewish men being beaten in New York City for fun? A guy walking down the street minding his own business and a bunch of people run up and start beating him. And it wasn't Palestinians who were doing it. It was young black men. I don't care about the race of these individuals in terms of who's perpetrating the crime. I care that the crimes get stopped. But I am sick of the lies from the left. I saw a video, and it was Hamas firing rockets into Israel. And people were tweeting, Hamas is defending itself. I'm like, bro, they're the ones who started firing the rockets in the first place. And then everyone's like, yeah, but you got to go back and look at the history in the West Bank. And I'm like, dude, you want to talk about the nuances of an ongoing war, which has been for what are we now at? It's like 50, 60 years. Yeah, I guess. And everyone's going to keep blaming the other side. It's your fault. It's your fault. It's your fault. When a group of people goes into civilian buildings, starts firing rockets into the air, saying, we're defending ourselves. No, you're not. You're bombing civilians. You're attacking schools. You are not defending yourself. If they were defending themselves in the West Bank, they would be in the West Bank defending these homes. They're not. They're using civilian locations to fire rockets. Now, of course, I'm not here to praise what Israel is doing in the West Bank or to talk about the U.S. funding what Israel is doing. I got an honest question. What is the U.S. doing in the Middle East? And why are we involved? I suppose the challenge is Israel would be absolutely crushed or wiped out if they lay down their arms. That's true. I mean, look at this. It's one of the sayings I see a lot of conservatives bringing up. What would happen if Israel just laid down all of their arms? Iron Dome, turn it off. They'd get wiped out in 2 seconds. And what would happen if Hamas stopped firing rockets? Israel would not be blowing up these civilian locations. I don't like that Israel's doing it. I don't like that they do these knock bombs and they target schools and they say about Hamas is operating out of there. I don't know what the solution is, but maybe Israel is a little heavy-handed, perhaps. I do, however, think it's absurd when I approach the whole thing as a layman and I hear people say that Israel is bad simply because they're capable. And I'm like, dude, if you fire a bunch of rockets at another guy and the guy's got more firepower, it's war. Don't be firing rockets at somebody who's got more weapons than you. And they just say, oh, they're defending themselves. Dude, look at this story. I'm sorry. No, I don't care. An Orthodox Jewish man was being chased down the street. I don't care what the excuse is for this. It's insane. They go on to mention that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict continues to escalate. It's been going on for decades, man. Earlier Tuesday, a large crowd of pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered outside the Israeli consulate in West LA. It was organized by the Palestinian Youth Movement. Over the weekend, thousands of pro-Palestinian demonstrators rallied in Westwood, calling for an end to violence. I'm down for that. I agree. End the violence. Take a look at this. DW reports German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas pledged unwavering security for synagogues in Germany in an interview with Funk Media Group on Thursday. Police have stepped up protection at Jewish temples and intervened in a number of anti-Israel rallies taking place across the country as violence escalates in the Middle East. Maas called on citizens to reject the idea of blaming people of the Jewish faith in Germany for events in the Middle East, whether on the streets or on social media. The foreign minister who placed blame for the violence currently gripping Israel on Hamas said there would be zero tolerance for attacks on synagogues in our country. I already know what's going to happen. The left is going to bring up a bunch of stories where, Jewish people have done something, or they'll claim Israel's doing that. But how do you justify everything we've seen so far over the past year or so? An Orthodox Jewish man walking down the street and being attacked. Diners in LA, and a car pulls up and they start throwing things at him. All right, I'm sure the left will say something like, well, these Jewish men were heckling or swearing. It's like, I don't care what the reason was. You want to have words? Have words. You want to get out of your car with a group of people and start beating some guys planning a wedding? I think you're the baddies. I'm sorry. I think that's true. It's funny because people point out this meme. They say all these far leftists, any one of them should go to Palestine and protest the way they protest here. So I'll tell you this. I've offered people up this opportunity. I remember years and years ago, somebody was posting on Facebook a ton of stuff about Israel and Palestine. I've been to Tel Aviv. I've never been to Gaza. And I was impressed because having been to Egypt and Morocco, and Singapore, but Singapore is not a Muslim nation, but, in the area, they have, I think, Malaysia. But seeing these extremely restrictive countries, so we'll push out Singapore for a second, being to Morocco and Egypt, and then going to Israel and seeing how kind of liberal it was. I was impressed. This is one of the few liberal democracies in the Middle East. And I don't mean liberal in the colloquial sense. I mean like classically liberal in a certain sense. Now, of course, they're fighting for survival, which means there's going to be war and there's going to be certain restrictions. There's going to be conscription. I'm not a fan of a lot of it, but I don't know. What do you do if they stop? They certainly get crushed. I hear these leftists talking about it. And so I said, I'll tell you what, man, I will right now, no joke, no lie, pay 100% of the costs for you to go with me to Gaza and we will film. And I'll just film you do your thing. I'm not going to tell you who to meet, tell you what to say. We'll just film your thing. And lo and behold, no, I'm not going to do that. What do you think would happen if these LGBTQ activists took their flags and went to Gaza or the West Bank and started, waving these things around? I tell you what would happen, because we saw it happen in Birmingham in the UK. When a school was doing an LGBTQ curriculum, a bunch of Muslims showed up and protested the school. And when these woke leftists showed up, they got yelled at by the Muslims and they were called degenerates and a whole bunch of really awful things. It's the weirdest thing to me. When you have people claiming that it's the Muslim population that's oppressed, when there's like dozens of Muslim nations in the country, and there's dozens of Muslim countries in the world, and there is only like one Jewish state which is in conflict. It's the craziest thing to me. It's the craziest. You want to talk about who's oppressed? I mean, obviously it's the Jewish people. Now, I'm not going to pretend like that means much outside of, this context. People in the United States are anything but oppressed and they have tremendous opportunity. And there are tons of extremely wealthy Jewish people, but there's tons of extremely wealthy Catholic people and Muslim people. And I don't think that really means much. Now we're seeing synagogues get attacked. German president said hatred of Jews will not be tolerated no matter from whom. German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier underscored that commitment on Thursday. Nothing can justify threats against Jews in Germany or attacks on synagogues in German cities. Whoever burns Star of David flags or shouts anti-Semitic slogans on our streets is not only abusing the right to demonstrate, but committing a crime. And I'll tell you this. In America, I think you have a right to do it. If some pro-Palestinian group wants to burn Israeli flags or Jewish flags, as long as they own it and they're doing it in a safe way, so be it. In Germany, not so much. I'm more concerned about the physical attacks on people, and I'm more concerned about the emboldening of the far left and their lies. From Fox News, Rashida Tlaib listed as special guest for event hosted by controversial, allegedly anti-Semitic activist. Maher Abdel Kader, I'm hopefully pronouncing it right, Palestinian American activist, has shared anti-Semitic content to social media in the past. They say the revelation comes shortly after Tlaib made headlines Tuesday by confronting the president on a Detroit tarmac, as she's repeatedly criticized his administration's handling of the ongoing crisis between Israel and Hamas militants in the Gaza Strip. Tlaib, a member of the so-called Squad, was advertised to deliver a special message of solidarity. Maher Abdel Kader, a Palestinian American activist who has in the past shared anti-Semitic content to social media, posted in March to his Instagram about the progressive event, which took place over Zoom. He had been a donor and fundraiser for Tlaib's successful 2018 campaign, but reports about his social media activities drew scrutiny and criticism. Let's talk about the disparity. Ilhan Omar made several anti-Semitic comments. The way I described it was crop dusting anti-Semitism. What do I mean by that? You ever see those planes, the crop dusters, they get real close to the ground, but they don't actually land, and they dust the crops with pesticides or whatever? She said things that made people like kind of side eye. She said it's all about the Benjamins, baby, in reference to, politicians' support for Israel and things like that. And I'm like, she didn't come out and directly say something overt, but it's interesting. She repeatedly makes these comments. She repeatedly, what did she sided with Erdogan or whatever? We know what she cares about. So when she makes these comments, people are like, dude, I think you just don't like Jewish people in general. We saw the Women's March. Remember when the organizers of the Women's March were saying insane things about the slave trade and these other conspiracies? I'm sickened by the mainstreaming of this fringe conspiratorial nonsense. They seek to rewrite history. And then I see these stories on the left and the right. And I tell you this, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of people on the left who are going to criticize me saying, I don't understand what I'm talking about. Absolutely fine. Fine. Now you can justify to me why people in these caravans are beating random Jewish people in the street. You want to talk about Israel, Palestine? Fine. I don't know, but stop lying to me. I saw that video with the rockets flying out of Hamas. They're defending themselves. Screw off. Simply because Israel has the ability to strike back does not make them immediately the bad guys in a war. Excuse me. The Iron Dome is the only thing keeping Israel safe. I think there's a report today. Even Lebanon is now firing rockets into Israel. There were 5 rockets fired. I believe they only intercepted 1. There's this iconic photo now. It's a long exposure showing rockets coming out of Gaza and the Iron Dome rockets going up. The Iron Dome, if you're not familiar, is the system by which Israel intercepts the rockets and blows them up. It's not really a dome. It's just a targeting system. And you can see when all the rockets are coming from one side and the others are going up to stop it. You want to talk about who's defending themselves? We can criticize a lot. I don't know how you solve a lot of these problems, but I can assure you, if the UN criticizes the West Bank settlements, then I think we need to have that conversation and there needs to be something done about this. Perhaps then it's fair to criticize Joe Biden and the U.S. government consistently supporting Israel in this, especially when you're supposed to be an American first, national populist, wondering why we're spending money on something like this. But the other issue, I suppose, is that, Israel will be wiped out and these people are not defending themselves when they're firing rockets at civilians. The argument that Israel shouldn't be bombing schools. Did you hear the story? The Associated Press was operating out of the same building as Hamas, and they're trying to deny it. And Israel targeted it, and the AP was keeping hush hush. Apparently, there was a report back in 2015 where the AP knew they were operating in a building with Hamas, and they just didn't report it. Stories that like Hamas came in and made demands of them to report certain things and not report certain things, and they never said any of it. Why? That's crooked. And if we don't have good journalism to know what's going on, I'm just going to tell y'all to shut up. I'm done with it. When the AP won't tell us that they're operating in the same space as Hamas, and Hamas tells them not to report things and they don't, and it only gets revealed later, why should I trust the news stories coming out from the Palestinian side? I just can't. I understand Israel's got their interests too, but they didn't fire these missiles first. I don't know what we're ever going to get out of that conflict. There's conservatives that are very defensive of Israel, which is, again, it's strange to me. I can agree with Michael Tracy on that one, who pointed out all these America First conservatives, they drop that as soon as it's Israel, and they justify spending all this money. I suppose the response is that just because you're America First doesn't mean you don't believe in, supporting Israel, whatever. You can believe in supporting America First and still believe in defending our allies when they're under siege. I'll tell you what I think. I think the military-industrial complex, I think Joe Biden, I think the Democrats want the conflict. It allows them to justify expanding military operations in the Middle East because they want to secure oil. They want to prop up the petrodollar. And they want to build pipelines and continue expanding fossil fuels and all that stuff. So they need to have a reason Otherwise, the Americans won't support it. I think the reason's obviously bunk. I think most Americans don't support it anyway. And so they've been struggling to maintain that presence. Now you've got conservatives defending the military expenditure into Israel because of the conflict. You see how this works? Joe Biden provides funding for Palestinians. The Hamas fires rockets into Israel. Conservatives jump to the aid of Israel, saying, we have to support them and protect them. And it allows Joe Biden to continue doing what he's doing with expanding in the Middle East. And how do you stop it? Man, if I had the answers, I'd give them to you. But I don't know. I'll tell you this. Okay, let's drop all the Israel-Palestine stuff. I don't know. You don't know, whatever. Fine. How about this? The Palestinian groups need to stop attacking Jewish people in the streets, and we need something done about that. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.